A profound and volatile wave of public anger is sweeping across Iran, not sparked by a single political flashpoint, but ignited by the slow-burning fuel of economic devastation and a palpable sense of national misdirection. Citizens from sprawling bazaars to university campuses are voicing a searing indictment of the government's priorities. The channeling of vast financial and material resources into military ventures and regional proxy conflicts, while a brutal economic crisis strangles ordinary life at home. The Iranian rial has become one of the world's worst-performing currencies. Inflation for basic foodstuffs like meat and dairy routinely exceeds 50%, and unemployment, particularly among the educated youth, remains chronically high. This has created a powerful, unifying grievance that cuts across traditional social divides, where the daily struggle for subsistence collides with the visible expenditure on the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, its extraterritorial Quds force, and support for allies in Syria, Yemen, and elsewhere. The protests, often decentralized and leaderless, flare in cities like Tehran, Mashhad, and Isfahan, with chants directly challenging the core revolutionary tenet of exporting its ideology, famously shouting, "Let go of Syria, think about us," and "Not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life for Iran." The sentiment is driving a palpable brain drain as professionals, academics, and skilled workers seek any pathway out of the country, viewing their future prospects as extinguished by systemic mismanagement and international isolation. The economic catastrophe is multi-layered, stemming from both external pressure and internal policy. The reimposition of severe U.S. propulsive sanctions following Washington's withdrawal from the nuclear deal in 2018 decimated Iran's oil exports, a primary source of government revenue and foreign currency. This external shock exposed and exacerbated deep structural weaknesses: a bloated, inefficient state sector, a banking system crippled by bad debts, and an economy overly dependent on imports. The government's response has included printing money to cover budget deficits, a direct catalyst for the hyperinflation ravaging household savings. Simultaneously, a significant portion of the nation's diminished wealth is allocated to what is termed the resistance economy, a paradigm that prioritizes security and geopolitical influence over civilian welfare. The IRGC, a military, political, and economic powerhouse, controls vast swaths of the formal and informal economy, from construction and oil to telecommunications. Its budgets are opaque but understood to be immense, financing not only domestic security and missile programs, but also the maintenance of militia networks across the Middle East. For the average Iranian, this translates to a glaring disparity. Witnessing the state find billions for overseas endeavors, while subsidies for food and fuel are cut, pensions evaporate against inflation, and public services crumble. Historically, this tension between domestic welfare and revolutionary expansionism is embedded in the DNA of the Islamic Republic. The 8-year war with Iraq in the 1982 solidified a siege mentality and justified the primacy of the security apparatus. The post-war reconstruction era under Presidents Hashemi Rafsanjani and Mohammad Khatami saw periods of attempted liberalization and outreach, but the security and ideological institutions consistently reasserted control, especially with the election of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in 2005 and the consolidation of power under the principalist factions. The 2009 Green Movement protests were largely a political challenge from the urban middle class disputing election results. The 2017 to 2019 protests were economically motivated, but grew to encompass political demands. The current unrest represents a maturation of that sentiment, where the economic complaint is inextricably fused with a critique of the entire strategic direction of the state. It questions the very cost of Iran's regional stature, asking whether the population should bear the burden of its government's ambitions. The death of Mahsa Amini in September 2022 and the subsequent Woman, Life, Freedom uprising added a powerful layer of social and gender oppression to the economic discontent, creating a multi-front crisis of legitimacy for the establishment. The political implications within Iran's complex power structure are severe. The protests present a direct challenge to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and the hardline establishment that consolidated power after the collapse of the nuclear deal. They create a dilemma for the elected government of President Ebrahim Raisi, who came to office promising to tackle corruption and economic hardship, but has failed to deliver tangible improvements. The unrest undermines the narrative of national unity in the face of foreign enemies, a central pillar of state propaganda. It also exposes potential fissures within the elite, between those in the clerical establishment who may prioritize domestic stability and those in the IRGC committed to the revolutionary project abroad. The state's response has been a familiar mix of intermittent internet blackouts, a heavy security presence, and arrests, aiming to suppress organization and communication. However, the economic nature of the grievance makes it difficult to quell permanently through coercion alone. The pain of empty wallets and hungry families is a constant mobilizing force. The social consequences are profound and corrosive. A deep-seated mistrust festers between a significant portion of the populace, particularly the young, and the governing institutions. The contract of acquiescence, in exchange for provision, has been broken. This has led to widespread despair and a phenomenon sociologists term internal emigration, where citizens disengage from political and social life, focusing solely on individual survival or planning for exit. The desire to leave, or flight, is a dominant topic in private conversations and on social media, seen as the only viable path for a dignified life for many. This exodus of human capital further weakens the country's long-term prospects, creating a vicious cycle of decline. The economic impact of this prioritization is quantifiable and devastating. Independent analyses suggest Iran spends billions annually on its military and regional network, a figure that remains opaque but is estimated by some research institutes to be in the range of 10–15% of its total government budget, a staggering allocation for a nation under severe economic sanctions. This spending competes directly with domestic needs. Subsidies for essential goods have been replaced by a targeted and often inefficient cash transfer system, while investment in public infrastructure from water management to transportation has stagnated. The inflation is not merely a statistic, it is a daily erosion of living standards. A middle-class family's savings can be halved in value within a year, pushing once secure households toward poverty. The formal job market cannot absorb the hundreds of thousands of university graduates produced each year, leading to underemployment and a profound sense of wasted potential. This economic hollowing out creates a self-reinforcing cycle. As talent and capital flee, the tax base shrinks and productivity declines, leaving the state even more reliant on its security apparatus and its ability to extract wealth from a dwindling pool of resources. The government's recent attempts to slash energy and food subsidies further to manage its budget deficit have only added fuel to the public's fury, seen as transferring the cost of geopolitical ambitions directly onto the plates of ordinary citizens. Globally, Iran's internal turmoil matters profoundly, as it directly impacts international security, energy markets, and the already fragile diplomacy surrounding its nuclear program. A state that is internally preoccupied and financially strained may act with greater risk-taking abroad to rally nationalist sentiment, or conversely, it may seek accommodation to relieve pressure. The protests underscore the ultimate limitation of the maximum pressure sanction strategy. While it has undoubtedly crippled the economy and hurt the population, it has not, to date, compelled the core leadership to alter its strategic regional policies or make lasting concessions on the nuclear dossier. Instead, it has accelerated Iran's pivot toward self-sufficiency in military production and deepened its economic and strategic ties with Russia and China, creating a new axis of sanctioned states operating outside the Western-led financial system. For Europe, the situation presents a dilemma between the desire to curb Iran's missile program and regional activities and the humanitarian consequences of a collapsing economy that could trigger further refugee waves. For the United States, the administration faces criticism from both sides. Those who argue the protests show the sanction strategy is working and should be intensified, and those who contend it only solidifies the regime's repressive grip and harms innocent people without achieving strategic goals. The international reaction has been divided along predictable geopolitical lines. Western governments, while expressing sympathy for the protesters and condemning human rights abuses, have been cautious not to embrace the movement openly, wary of providing the Iranian government with a pretext to label dissent as foreign-instigated treason. Statements from the United States and the European Union focus on the right to peaceful assembly and criticize the violent crackdown. Regional rivals like Saudi Arabia and Israel watch closely, seeing the unrest as a potential weakening of a primary adversary, but their official comments are restrained to avoid a nationalist backlash within Iran that could benefit the regime. Russia and China, however, offer full-throated support to the Iranian government, framing the protests as illegitimate foreign interference and affirming their commitment to state sovereignty and bilateral cooperation. This external division effectively provides the Iranian leadership with diplomatic cover from powerful allies, insulating it from unified global condemnation and enabling it to continue its security response without significant international cost, aside from the pre-existing sanctions regime. Expert-level analysis suggests the Iranian state, particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is currently configured more for regime survival than for economic governance or public contentment. Its extensive intelligence network, control over communication channels, and proven willingness to use force give it a powerful short-term advantage in quelling street demonstrations. However, analysts note this is a reactive, not a proactive strategy. The state lacks a compelling economic roadmap to address the root causes of the anger. The potential for a sustained, low-intensity simmer of unrest is high, with periodic eruptions triggered by any new economic shock, such as the further reduction of subsidies or another sharp devaluation of the rial. The protest movement itself, while broad in grievance, suffers from a lack of coherent leadership and a unifying political platform beyond opposition to the status quo. This makes it difficult to topple the regime, but also makes it impossible for the state to negotiate or appease, as there is no single entity to engage with. The result is a dangerous stalemate, a population that is increasingly disillusioned and economically desperate, facing a state that is militarily powerful but ideologically rigid and lacking in popular consent. What could happen next hinges on several interconnected variables. The regime may attempt cosmetic economic reforms or anti-corruption drives to placate public opinion, though past such efforts have yielded little tangible result due to the systemic nature of the problem. A more likely path is the further securitization of the economy and society, with the IRGC consolidating its control over key sectors to fund itself and its activities independently of the formal state budget, deepening the corruption and inequality that fuel dissent. The nuclear negotiations remain in a frozen state, but the domestic economic pressure could eventually push Tehran back to the table for some form of temporary relief, though any deal would face fierce resistance from hardliners who view economic independence from the West as a strategic necessity. Conversely, should the regime feel existentially threatened, it might choose external confrontation as a diversionary tactic, escalating tensions in the Gulf or accelerating its nuclear advancements to rally nationalist support and reframe the narrative around foreign enemies. For the Iranian people, the options appear grim: endure the worsening conditions, risk imprisonment or violence by protesting, or join the accelerating exodus. The widespread desire to leave is itself a powerful political statement and a long-term demographic and economic threat to the country's future. The enduring image is of a nation at odds with itself, its government projecting power across regions while its citizens, in growing numbers, seek only an exit from the darkness of economic despair and political suffocation, voting with their feet in a silent, sustained referendum on the revolution's legacy.